I love talking about Thanksgiving because from like a historiographical sense, you really see the impact. So while I'm talking, you'll notice like economics plays a role, politics plays a role, society, religion, all these different things. And so the memories that we have sometimes aren't necessarily the same. Interesting enough, in 1621, there was no turkey being served. The Native Americans brought venison, they brought deer. There may have been some ducks, so that would have been the bird that they would have had. I always like to tell people this, pumpkin was probably there, but it was not a pumpkin pie. They didn't have the ovens to make pumpkin pies yet. They also lacked sugar and butter. The Pilgrims did not have those as major ingredients at that time. But if they would have, and I'm going to challenge all of you to add this to your Thanksgiving lunches and meals, is they would boil pumpkin. So it turn into like kind of a pumpkin stew type of thing. How tasty that's going to be here. And then keep in mind too, potatoes aren't really native to North America, so they're not really in abundance here either at this point in time as well. In terms of historiography, this was not the first Thanksgiving. Most Americans think, oh, this is the first time this ever happened. Truth be told, in Europe and throughout colonial America, there had been a number of other Thanksgivings along the way too. Usually, a Thanksgiving day meant like thanking God for something like we just won this battle or this war, or we had a really good harvest, we survived this drought, or something else like that as well. And then also at the same time, having a celebration for the harvest was very common throughout the world. Wampanoag Native Americans also had a celebration for the harvest too, so that was something that wasn't too uncommon for them. We know about this event because in 1621, Edward Winslow, and I like to say this too because this is another reason I like to talk about this, a gentleman by the name of William Bradford, who was the first governor of Plymouth Plantation, and I get to lay claim, he's my 17 times great grandfather. So I've got that kind of connection going back there as well. Um, we know that 50 English, that is, they refer to it English men, but there were men and women there, and 90 Wampanoag Native Americans showed up, all men. There were no Native American women that showed up here too. And this is mostly a diplomatic event. They were kind of thanking each other, Native Americans, thank you for showing us how to survive the winter and everything else like that here as well. Well, that happened in 1621, and then the story just kind of disappears. Nobody really talks about it. In New England, a few people had some memories of it, but that was pretty much it. The only other Thanksgivings we have was George Washington at the end of the American Revolutionary War called for a day of Thanksgiving. James Madison called for a day of Thanksgiving after the War of 1812. And then it's not until I'm going to get the date here, 1841. So about 400 years later, a minister by the name of Andrew Young wrote about that first Thanksgiving. And so it kind of got the title and it kind of comes back into America's consciousness, but he does not get credit for us having a Thanksgiving. That's going to go to a young lady by the name of Sarah Josepha Hale. She wrote, and it'd be like a woman's magazine today, maybe, or a women's website. So she was writing a goodies ladies book, and this was how to cook and clean and take care of, the domestic areas and stuff like that. But she thought, since our country is so young, we needed a day of unity. We needed a reason to come together. So she kept pushing for this idea of a Thanksgiving. And I'm glad to hear that some of you have changed your diets and not doing the traditional. What was funny is she wanted all Americans to celebrate this. So the best way to celebrate, you can't go out and tell people, let's go to a five-star restaurant and have your chef make your own personal meal to you. 99% of us, that's not going to work out. So she came up with some ideas that everybody could get, something like a turkey, which is going to be fairly cheap. It's going to be a big bird to go ahead and eat. Things like pumpkin pie. Pumpkin's fairly cheap to get here as well. Potatoes, all the things that we associate today, we're kind of like, okay, everybody can get those. Everybody can get that kind of food here and get that kind of stuff here too. And again, her goal is to foster national unity. Nothing works. Almost 2 decades of her pushing for this, and it's not until Abraham Lincoln becomes president. And in 1863, he's going to put out a proclamation. And what was happening in 1863 is that summer, as you probably all know, the Battle of Gettysburg took place. And then he does the Gettysburg Address, and he goes, "Yeah, we need to step back and have a day of Thanksgiving, even in the midst of the war. We need to remember the soldiers and have a blessing from God for all the things that are taking place here as well." He said in his proclamation, the last Thursday of November would be the official day. Remember that, because that's going to come back in just a second here too. And what I love about this is he got a shot into the South by proclaiming Thanksgiving, because he knew, and everybody knew back then, Plymouth Plantation was not America's first colony. Jamestown's going to be the first colony. Actually, 2 years before the Thanksgiving in Plymouth, Jamestown had something that resembled a Thanksgiving. But he said, nope, you're trying to secede from us here, so we're going to block you from the history. And Massachusetts, congratulations, you're now the Genesis story of America. It's not Jamestown anymore. It's the Pilgrims coming for religious freedom and all these other things like that as well. Got to give credit in the modern day. A lot of historians are looking at and saying, actually the Spanish had a Thanksgiving in Florida as well. So Plymouth Plantation is not going to be the first. The other thing that's missing from this story, and I'll mention this again in just a couple of seconds here, but is the indigenous perspective. For centuries, we just kind of ignored. They were just happily showing up. They were just, and unfortunately, old textbooks, which I'll talk about too, they referred to them as the savages. And so here's the great white culture coming in, showing them all these great things, these religious things, all these modern things and stuff like that. When in reality, it was the Native Americans that kept them alive through that winter there as well. Native Americans, I don't know if this happens in Pennsylvania, but some of the Native American tribes here in Minnesota also refer to it as the National Day of Mourning. So they do not celebrate Thanksgiving. They remember it for being more of a negative aspect of it as well. And then this is where I'm kind of curious too with some of the traditions that are out there. Today in modern day historiography, national unity's gone away. No one said your family stands up and does the Pledge of Allegiance. So that national patriotic duty thing has kind of gone by the wayside. Religion, not necessarily usually a major portion of it as well here, but family, the family getting together, a reason for the family to get together. And now look at the economics here. Eating, food, lots and lots of food. Football is going to be played all day. I think of all the commercials that come with that as well. And then, dun, 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 Black Friday is going to be a major role here as well. So we went from kind of that religious aspect to more of a consumer aspect of the whole thing here as well. And then I'll jump into textbooks real quickly. Basically, for a few hundred years, it was just this great myth. The Englishmen came over here looking for their freedom of religion. They survived the winter. They wanted to thank the Native Americans. This is a great religious moment, and things like that. Let me ask the people in the room here, Jonathan, if you can help direct this conversation. It's not until the 1950s and 60s that we actually see a change in our textbooks about how the story has changed. And that came out of the civil rights movement.
Do you think you could give some context on what it might have been before the civil rights movement? And
So
maybe
yeah, it
that'll
was very,
some thoughts.
very mythical. It was just kind of these, you always saw these wonderful paintings in textbooks, and the pilgrims were all dressed in their white and black and their stovepipe hats and stuff like that. Native Americans were always just sitting on the ground and things like that. When civil rights comes in, and you see this all the time, one of the first things they always want to do is they want to go to textbooks. They want to have an impact on what the next generation learns about these different things here. And so it wasn't originally about Thanksgiving, but it was more about slavery. So what were African Americans demanding when it came to history textbooks after the 1960s and 70s, after the civil rights movement? What did they want to see in textbooks?
Proper representation of like the truth.
Yeah.
Did
I
you hear
heard it
that?
out there. Like,
Yeah, so
um,
like said proper representation.
Yeah, exactly. Not just the story of the ignorant slaves from Africa were brought here. There used to be stories in textbooks like, look at this, we brought them Christianity, we brought them English, we, taught them all these trades and stuff like that. It's like, oh man, okay, you're missing the big picture on slavery. So they wanted more emphasis on the cruelty behind it and everything else like that. As an offshoot of that, and this is something that matters to us here in Minnesota because it's going to start here. There's a group called AIM in the 1970s. And it's the American Indian movement that starts here in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And they said, whoa, 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 whoa. They weren't just friendly Indians. They're actually a tribe. They were the Wampanoag. They had their own government system. They had their own trading system. They had alliances that the Pilgrims plugged themselves into. So we want more details about that. We don't want just to have these pictures of happy Native Americans enjoying a meal with the white settlers that are here as well. So AIMS, American Indian Movement's terminology is going to have an impact here as well. And then just the last thing, I'll leave you with some of the other interesting things that are out there. Have any of you ever heard of Franksgiving? Franksgiving came up in 1939 when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, no, we're going to move Thanksgiving from the last Thursday to the third Thursday, the second to last Thursday here. This is during the Great Depression. He wanted to extend time so people would go out and do more Christmas shopping. This was not one of his wiser moves. When you get a chance, if you haven't studied this already, I'm sure you'll cover it in the future here. He also tries to expand the Supreme Court at one point. They weren't voting the way he wanted to, so he wanted to add more members and then appoint all the members to agree with him. These are two times that his own party turned against him. One was for Thanksgiving, and they said, no, 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 no. Thanksgiving is going to be set on this day. We cannot change that. We don't care. So his own Democratic Party is going to vote against him as well. That happened in 1941, just before World War II broke out here. Who was the first president to make it official? George H.W. Bush, 1989. Most people think it goes way back. It's not. It's kind of a modern tradition, and presidents have been doing that ever since here. Kennedy actually kind of pardoned one. Abraham Lincoln was sent to Turkey, and their family turned it into a pet, so that he did not get pardoned at that time. And then the last thing I'm going to leave you with, Gabe, because I just kind of am happy this tradition didn't take off, but also kind of sad too, because it would have really changed things drastically. 1926, Calvin Coolidge is in the White House, and an American said, hey, I'm going to send you something you can have for your Thanksgiving meal. He sent the Coolidge family a raccoon. He thought having raccoon for Thanksgiving would be the ideal type of food that Americans should eat here. Man, that changes the images of Thanksgiving very quickly if we don't have turkeys and we have raccoon on the platter at this point in time. Again, the Coolidge family turned it into a pet, so they just kept it and said, we'll keep it for ourselves at this point. So sorry for going really quickly through all that, but I hope you can kind of see we had an event. We know exactly what happened. Winslow and Bradford told us the story. It kind of disappeared, became unimportant. Then a minister and the woman who wrote about it started saying, there's other reasons we should have this. So that comes back, and then you start seeing all the traditions. There's some religious traditions, some economic traditions, societal traditions, and all kind of play a role in all this here.